Brian Weihmeir, Technical Team Agronomist with LG Seeds, covering South Central Illinois, here with this week's Agronomy Tip of the Week. Doing a little bit of scouting here this morning and thought I'd talk a little bit about early season weeds and winter annuals, how to control them, how to prevent them, and some things to think about shortly after planting. And so when we look at the biological control, some growers have started utilizing cover crops, and along with some of those benefits, a lot of those guys will tell you that it does kind of suppress some of that weed pressure because you have something actively growing in your field competing for the water and the sunlight. So that is one way to kind of control some of these weeds. The other way is mechanical control, and whether that's with fall tillage or a field cultivator. And right here we actually have a pretty good example. This field right here that we're seeing that has some of this pressure, this had nothing done to it in the fall, and this was soybeans last year. And then actually right to the field line, you can see where this field was conventionally tilled. And there's a few winter annuals out here, but you can definitely tell right to the line that there is quite a bit of suppression in that weed pressure. So fall tillage is a good way to control that as well. The other thing too is spring tillage, and there's some different tools that you can use. Got to be a little bit careful with some of the vertical tillage tools out there because some of them struggle to uproot some of these weeds. But with a field cultivator, it's a good way to control some of those. But the one thing you got to think about, and in this field, the pressure isn't too bad, but some of those fields that really have heavy pressure, you might have to think about hitting it once with a field cultivator and getting some of those uprooted, and then maybe coming back and hitting it a second time just to level off that field a little bit to make sure we have good planter performance. And so mechanical is another good way to control these weeds as well. And then the last thing to think about too is the chemical control of things. So there's two different ways to control these weeds with chemicals. One is going to be a fall burn down, especially if you're no-till, like in this situation. A fall burn down is a good tool, especially for winter annuals, because a lot of those will germinate in the fall and then finish their life cycle in the spring. And so if we do a fall burn down, a lot of times we can kill a lot of these weeds when they're in the early stages. So that way we keep a cleaner field in the spring. And then the other way is with a spring burn down. And, with the spring burn down, there's a lot of different concoctions, different formulations, but the one thing to think about is, especially with this field here and some other ones that maybe have heavier pressure, is that when you have these weeds down here, a lot of times it does fail to dry up some of that ground. You could see, pulling some of this back, how much wetter that soil is. So if you've got really heavy pressure, sometimes just relying on that spring pass can delay some plantings and keep our fields from drying out. So if you're constantly fighting some of these winter annuals, it might be a good idea to think about tag teaming a fall burn down along with your spring burn down as well. And so when it comes to controlling some of these early season weeds, a lot of times once we get them controlled either with chemicals or with a field cultivator, a lot of times it's kind of in the back burner because we have a lot of things going on in the spring. But another thing to think about too is when you have some of these weeds in here, a lot of them can be kind of a host to a lot of different insects and some different pathogens. And so my recommendation is, if you have some of these weeds and you have some really heavy pressure in your fields, it might be a good idea to take note of that, and shortly after planting, going out and scouting some of these fields. There's a lot of seed treatments, a lot of different traits that can help control against, like cutworm and armyworm. But again, having some of these winter annuals and some of these early season weeds in our fields, if they are in high densities, can be a host to some of those insects, and it's something we'll want to keep an eye out for early on, shortly after planting. And those thresholds are actually fairly low, so it's a good idea just to keep an eye out on these fields if you do have that pressure, and again, just keep monitoring those shortly after planting just to make sure that our crops are getting off to a good start. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to visit us at lgseeds.com. But till then, have a safe planting season, and we'll talk to you later. Thank you.